Hey guys, so this video is going to be on which gear stats you want in King's Raid on your gear. So gear stats, or options as they are called in King's Raid, are the 4 substats that you get on legendary gear, or the 1 on uncommon, 2 on rare, or 3 on heroic. So if I just go over here, do I have any heroic, I wonder? Let's see, yeah, there's one. So heroic you can see has 3 lines of substats, 3 options, and the highest you can get is 4 lines with legendary gear. Now, these substats are what you're going to spend a lot of your time in King's Raid looking for. You want perfect substats for the various characters you use in your team, you want perfect substats for different types of content, and you want perfect substats on different types of sets. So gear sets are mostly dragon sets. There's also the manticore set, but we're going to ignore that for now. And the main ones you're going to want to pay attention to are the black dragon set, so darkness armor, which is the best just all around. Then there's the fire set, so let's go to someone that actually has good ones. There's the fire set, which is crit. The black set gives mana on every attack, MP per attack. The red dragon set, or the fire set, gives crit. And then there's the Ice Dragon and Poison sets. Ice Dragon set gives max HP, which makes it best for tanks. And the Poison set gives crit resistance, which is a niche that you can use for PvP, but it's not super necessary. So the best one in general to farm is the Black Dragon set, but the Red Dragon is easiest to farm, which is why you'll find a lot of newer players or mid-game players using Red Dragon sets with perfect substats, as substats are much more important than the set itself. The set itself provides the equivalent of 2 to 3 lines of substats, depending on how much of the set you have. The substats provide 4 lines per piece of gear for legendary gear, which is what makes them much more important. For DPS, the most important substats are attack, attack speed, crit, and crit damage, which you can see I have on each of these T6 gears, as these were the perfect T6 selectors. The T7 is slightly different. I have attack, crit, attack speed, and instead of crit damage in this, I opted to have lifesteal. Generally, you want 1 line of lifesteal on your gear, not on each piece, just 1 line of lifesteal across all 16 lines of substats that you'll have from your 4 pieces of gear. The unique weapons do not have substats, so you can ignore them in terms of substats. You're just looking for a single line of lifesteal across all your gear. And you do this to kind of alleviate the pressure on the healer, just because if your unit that's doing 1,000,000 DPS has a single line of lifesteal, you'll get 11% lifesteal. If I go over here, you can see right there. Which means at 1,000,000 DPS, they're recovering 110,000 health per second. And seeing as most DPS units don't have that much health, Mirianne, once I finish getting her T7 5-star orb, will probably get to about 2, maybe 2.5 million at most. You can see that having 110,000, and that's just if you're doing 1,000,000 DPS. On a lot of content, you can do much more than that. My Mirianne probably does 1.5 to 2 million DPS. In most 4-man content, it goes higher in stuff like Guild Raid or World Boss. World Boss, she's doing like 12 million DPS. So just 2 million DPS right there is 220,000 health per second that she is regaining, and this means that she is taking a lot of pressure off of my Frey, so that my Frey can focus on healing Klaus or Sonya, or maybe healing herself if she's being focused by a backline assassin. So getting that 1 line of lifesteal is a very good idea. Now, for total endgame, you don't need to get the 1 line of lifesteal. What you can do is you can get lifesteal as an enchantment option. The problem with this is enchantments are super random. You need to run the hard mode dragon for them every week. You can buy them in the shop, but you don't get to choose which enchantment goes on the gear. You just gotta kind of pray, which is kind of difficult to reconcile with. Like, I can show you enchantment right here actually as I'm at the forge. Go to improve equipment. Currently my Frey is using this orb, and you can see the orb already has crit on it, which is a fairly good enchantment. So I won't try to re-enchant that. I don't think I have any other piece of gear, honestly, that I want to enchant right now. Maybe if I have like an almost perfect robe. I don't think I have an almost perfect anything to enchant. Alright, so I'll leave enchantment for now, but pretty much, if I show you my gear, you can see that I've enchanted a few items. I've got accuracy on my Marianne's earrings. This orb has crit on it, although it's only 2.5%. And it's also on a flame orb, which is kind of redundant because the flame orb is part of the crit set, which means if I give her one more piece of crit gear, she will gain another 13% crit, which combined with Frey's natural Transcendence perk would give her a ton of crit. And Frey doesn't need that much crit. So for DPS, you want the attack speed, crit damage lines. And when you're farming gear, generally you're going to want to look for gear that is what we call three-line perfect. 4-line perfect is obviously ideal, but the odds of getting that are pretty much slim to none. 3-line perfect is gear like this, where you have crit damage, attack speed, and max HP. Actually, this gear is perfect for who I'm using it for. I actually rerolled attack speed because I want to use this gear on Sonya, because Sonya, her Transcendence 5 perk gives her a 15% chance to deal 10% of her max HP as magic damage, which means you want to give her as much maximum HP and attack speed as possible, and then you want crit and crit damage to improve that damage she's doing. So that orb is actually perfect for Sonya, but for most characters, you're looking for stuff like this. Sorry, wrong one. Like this. Attack speed, crit. All you're missing is the crit damage, and this one actually has lifesteal, which means even without crit damage, I would still consider using this, just because it's got the one line of lifesteal I'd be looking for. So if you can get 3-line perfect gear, attack speed, crit, attack speed, crit damage, attack speed, crit damage, attack speed, I think that's all of them actually. Crit damage, attack, I don't know. If you can get 3-line perfect gear, then you can go and re-roll the lines on that gear to try and make it perfect. So for example, here is an item I've been trying to re-roll for Sonya. I've got crit, max HP, crit damage. I just need to re-roll the penetration to attack speed to make it perfect. Another example, I believe, would be this for Frey. So it's got crit, penetration, crit damage, attack. I want attack speed on it, but penetration is also pretty good, so I've been leaving it at that. This one, I actually rolled crit damage in place of, I want to say it was magical defense. So I kept it because even though having extra attack is worth it, trying to re-roll for the one perfect substat you want is really difficult. And when you re-roll, you can only re-roll one option on the gear. You only have one choice to choose. You can never re-roll a second option. Also, it costs 100 rubies for the first reroll, 200 for the second, 400 for the third, 800 for the fourth, and so on and so forth, doubling each time. Which means unless you are blessed with a ton of reforged tickets, which pretty much no one is because, well, let's see, I've got 10 at the moment. We've been giving out 19 since I started playing the game, 10 in my newbie rewards and 9 in a random event. And you can occasionally find them for 3 million gold for 1 in May's general shop. But it's pretty rare. I've seen 1 since the revamped shop went out, and as such they're pretty difficult to get, and you don't generally want to use them. You want to use them sparingly. You don't want to use them on items that aren't 3 substat perfect. You're looking to use them to make absolutely perfect gear. I think the only piece of perfect gear I have to kind of show you that is Frey's orb. It's the only piece of perfect gear that I have that was not perfect when it started out. It started off attack, crit, attack speed, max HP, and I managed to finally roll crit damage on it, which made it a perfect DPS gear. Now that's for DPS, and DPS gear can be used on anyone, but generally your tanks want a separate set of substats. Tanks want defensive gear. So defensive gear, the ideal is HP, magical defense, physical block. You cannot roll magical block, you can only rune for it and get various items for it. So this is a pretty good example right here. If I can reroll that crit damage to physical block, that will be a perfect defensive gear. Unfortunately, it's on the fire set, which means I don't really plan to reroll this. as I'd much prefer a black dragon or an ice dragon set, or even a poison dragon set for a tank. The only advantage to fire dragon set is I could easily farm more of it for myself and use it to make it 5-star, as 5-star in the gear will make it twice as strong. It'll give 27,000 physical defense as opposed to 13,000 as a piece of 5-star gear. That's why I'm saving all these black dragon armor pieces and looking for something better than this. I've been kind of unlucky looking for tank gear from the black dragon, but I keep trying. Eventually I'll find one, and then I'll give my Klaus or my Sonya a piece of 5-star tank gear. I am kind of gimping myself by not making a piece of 5-star tank gear for now, but it's okay. For the content I've been doing, this gear is enough, and it's only really hurting me in PvP and potentially in completing Chapter 7 Hell mode, which I've kind of put on the back burner for now as I make new members of the team to finish the Tower of Challenges. So tanks, yeah, they want max HP, they want physical defense, they want magical defense, and they want physical block. Sonya is an exception because she can do a really good tanky DPS build, but she is the exception. She is not the rule. So in general, you're kind of looking for DPS, you just want maximized DPS. And if you look at the damage calculations, it's kind of easy to see just how big an effect this can have. It's pretty easy to say, oh, well, I mean, I've got 2 set perfect, I've got attack speed, and max HP and physical defense are nice because they keep my dude alive, or I've got crit and crit damage, I don't really need all that extra attack and attack speed. But with how the math works in the damage calculations, adding these extra substats, as well as maxing out the substats, so getting them to, like if I go over to my Marianne, for example, using the option enhancement to get them to 11% and plus 110, as well as plus 22%, well 20% on T6 for crit damage, will really improve the DPS of your unit by a lot, like 2 to 3 times if you can get full perfect gear for your DPS unit. So it's really worth it just looking for the right substats and farming them up. For your first few pieces of T7 gear, when you're just getting to 71 and you want to switch to T7 gear, I would recommend going with heroic gear. For your DPS at the very least, just get perfect heroic gear. Like I used this for a while, attack speed, crit damage. And that's because your DPS, with the exception of the earrings, none of these armor items matter for your DPS in terms of, well, I shouldn't say they don't matter. It does matter how much armor and HP and magical defense they have. But in general, as long as your tank's doing their job and it's not PvP where there's enemies diving your backline, your DPS is going to be, for the most part, in most content, be fairly safe. And especially once you just hit 71, when you're just trying to get them to 80, you're just grinding through story mode. Story mode, you can really just pick and choose from various units, various stages that don't have enemies that can dive the backline or hit your DPS. So just using unawakened, but perfect subset heroic gear is perfectly fine. Later on, once you start farming dragons, if you can get 2 or 3 set perfect to replace these, that is definitely recommendable, and I would suggest earrings first because earrings have the best basic stat on them. They have attack as a basic stat, which your DPS really wants. My earrings, for example, provide almost, at 5-star, these will provide as much attack as my Marianne has for base attack, which is pretty huge. So getting earrings first is a good idea, but getting all the other stuff is pretty good as well. And eventually getting that 4th perfect substat on all your gear to upgrade from the heroic gear with perfect substats will be a big improvement for your DPS. For the tank, it's a bit different. Yes, you want to have perfect substats, but having the base stat is pretty important as well. For your tank, you don't want to neglect the base stat because the base stat for the tank, for the armor, and for the HP, and for the accessory, because you're generally going to use a ring, which is also HP, just like the orb, is pretty important because the tank needs all those substats to survive. In fact, the least important for the tank is actually the weapon. And for most tanks, you just want the unique weapon anyways. It's not really essential for most tanks that aren't Visca that I can really think of. Sonya, her unique weapon's pretty good, but she doesn't need it, and in PvP, a legendary weapon can actually even do better. Klaus's unique weapon would be amazing on like any DPS, but on Klaus, it's just kind of whatever, you don't need it. There's a few other examples of tanks that do want the unique weapons, and it's never a bad idea to get the unique weapon. It's usually better, but it's kind of a back burner project usually. It's not something, if you get their unique weapon, don't grind it, use it, but you don't need the unique weapon for a tank to perform, not optimally obviously, but properly and even exceptionally. So for tanks, the weapon you're really just looking for substats. For example, here I've got P-Dodge, Max HP, MDef, and attack speed because my Sonya uses it, so having attack speed is pretty good. And then you really want a good ring. You want a T7 legendary ring, T7 legendary orb, T7 legendary armor, and T7 legendary sub armor. Just because the tank wants all these substats and they want the substats, but they also want the main stat, and they want them to do their job, which is keeping your team alive. Like, armor adds 27,000 physical defense. A T7 armor at plus 25 star, 27,000 physical defense. That is 4 times the base physical defense of my Sonya at level 80. And that's the same for all knights. The base stats of all classes are the same. Well, not all classes. The base stats of all members of the same class are the same. So my Raw and my Miriam, for example, you can see their base stats here are both the same. 19,592 attack, 6,208 physical defense. You can see they're all the same. So a knight's armor, just the base stat it provides alone is 4 times the base armor for the knight. And then of course you get into all the substats. You want P defense on all the substats, you want P block, you want MDef, and you want max HP. And all of these will provide a huge boost to your knight's survivability. That's actually what I'm farming for right now. As soon as I'm done the video, I'm going to go back into Dragon Raids and keep farming to get my knights better tanking gear so that I can tank for harder content. Anyways guys, that is the basics of substats in King's Raid. For DPS, like I said, attack speed, crit damage. For tanks, it's max HP, MDef, PDef, P block. You're looking for at least 2 to 3 of these subsets, preferably 3. For DPS, right before I go, I suppose, for DPS, accuracy, penetration, lifesteal, all of these can be used to substitute for a main stat, but I would look at it as a kind of 2-for-1 deal. If you have 2 perfect substats, let's see if any of these have them. That's almost perfect. That's got max HP. So none of these have 2 substats. Well, kind of substats, I guess. Non-optimal substats, I guess I'll call them. So accuracy, penetration, and lifesteal. Like I said, you want the 1 line of lifesteal. Penetration, though, is actually more important than lifesteal. And penetration can totally substitute for any of the 4 perfect substats. Although I would personally, if you had a choice, go for attack over as the best one, because a lot of units' scalings really rely on attack, so having more attack is always a good thing. You can cut out crit if you are using Red Dragon Set pretty easily, just because Red Dragon Set provides crit, so you don't need to have a crit line on all your pieces of gear. Crit damage, I wouldn't really want to cut out, but you can cut out. Attack speed, kind of the same thing. If you're using Black Dragon gear, you don't necessarily need attack speed, just because attack speed is what you use to generate mana. So the more Black Dragon gear you have, the more mana you'll have. Of course, what this means is if your hero is really mana hungry, you will want more attack speed. But having accuracy is pretty important because, not necessarily in PvE, but in PvP, because if you are missing, if you have like a big skill, for example, Miriam's assassination skill, and that is most of your damage. My Miriam does like 15 million damage with a single assassination every 14 seconds. It's a huge portion of her damage. And if that misses, that is a huge portion of her DPS that is missing. Raw has it even worse if you don't use his dark. So if I'm using the light perk for Raw, for Blade Claw is Raw's DPS. Nothing else he does, except with the small exception of Hack and Merciless, really give him DPS. Blade Claw is where Raw's DPS is. And how Blade Claw works is upon a critical hit, it recovers 2 mana and the skill cooldown is reset. It's got a 20-second cooldown. If you don't get a critical hit, it goes on cooldown, and you're missing your basically your source of DPS for 20 seconds. So obviously Ra wants 100% critical hit. However, what a lot of people fail to realize is if you missed the skill, then you didn't get a critical hit. It doesn't matter if the attack would have crit. If you missed the skill, you didn't get a critical hit, and it also goes on cooldown, which means you are once again at 20 seconds without your source of DPS, really. In PvP, this is a big problem because a lot of characters have critical resist, which means your Ra's 100% crit chance can be downgraded to 90, 80, 70, or even 60%. And while that might seem okay, when you're spamming Blade Claw every second, all of a sudden that 60% chance means that the odds that you miss it is it's about 50% after the second Blade Claw. You're going to miss that Blade Claw pretty soon. Or miss the critical hit, rather. So getting accuracy and getting 100% crit is important on Ra, but getting the accuracy is also pretty important just because if they've got any dodge or if they crowd control your Ra during the attack, then you don't get the crit and the skill misses and you're out of DPS. So getting a bit of accuracy is pretty important. A lot of people favor it on enchantments just because getting some enchantments is... it's not easy, but if you get accuracy enchantments, at least that way you've got the accuracy. You can use it on the sub-armor, like I'm using it on my Mirianne, but I'd much prefer, honestly, to make this a critical damage rune, and to replace the accuracy rune with critical damage. So getting some accuracy is not bad, but I wouldn't go for more than a single line. Penetration is a bit different, because penetration, you really want to hit the soft cap, which is I want to say it's 450, 45%. So you can see most of this gear, actually, with the exception of the orb, has penetration on it. Once I option enhance and max all three of them, that will be 33% penetration, which combined, this is actually my Cleo's gear, so combined with Cleo's natural 15% penetration, that gives her 48% penetration, which hits the soft cap and actually slightly exceeds it. And I believe there is a Transcendence perk for one of the classes that gives penetration. I want to say it's Archer. Yeah, and if you're running an Archer with your team and you run Eagle Eye perk, you can also give your allies 150 penetration, as well as some accuracy, to kind of make up for not having those substats on all your DPS's gear. But in the end, you cannot go wrong with perfect substats, just attack speeds, crit damage. Having penetration is pretty good, and penetration I would actually say can go 1-to-1 with any of the perfect substats. And accuracy and lifesteal, one line of lifesteal is good, and apart from that I would say if you get accuracy and lifesteal on an item, and it's got the other two subsets are perfect, attack speed, crit damage, you can use that item if you don't have a better version. That is a very good item. That's pretty much the same as 3 substat perfect. And if you reroll accuracy to another of the perfect subsets, that's basically like 3.5 line perfect, or perfect if you don't have another piece of lifesteal gear, like this is. So it's pretty damn good. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope this kind of helped you figure out which substats go on which gear for who, and how to kind of gear up your units based on what they do. Subscribe if you liked it. I know I kind of rambled. I'll try to fix that for future King's Raid videos. And have a good one.